It's like a divorce, you go through the good times and you have some of the bad times and you get a divorce. And once that happens, you both move on.
What happens when the voice that once defined love songs for a generation suddenly vanishes? Into silence, into solitude, into self-exile? For decades, we've obsessed over fame, building entire industries to immortalize it, yet time and again, it fails to deliver peace. The stage gives applause, but not belonging. The spotlight reveals, but rarely heals. Then came Peter Cetera. At the height of his power, he walked away. No scandal, no meltdown, just a man choosing something no one else in his position ever dared: obscurity. Now, at 80 years old, his life reveals a truth few ever see, about children, houses, cars, and quiet fortune. In the summer of 1985, Peter Cetera did something unthinkable. At the peak of his fame, as the silky voice behind Chicago's biggest ballads, a face plastered on posters from record shops to teenage bedrooms, he walked away. Not with a bang, not with a farewell tour, just a quiet, controversial exit that blindsided the music industry and fractured a band forever. Cetera had been the voice of hits like "If You Leave Me Now," "Hard to Say I'm Sorry," and "You're the Inspiration." His tenor wasn't just recognizable, it was unforgettable. That aching, smooth delivery had sold millions of records and defined a generation's soundtrack. But behind the platinum plaques and sold-out arenas, something darker was building. For years, internal tensions simmered within Chicago. Cetera, who had grown more reclusive as fame mounted, was frustrated. He wanted creative control, more ballads, more solo material, and, perhaps most importantly, more time off. The band, driven by a grueling tour schedule and a deep commitment to their jazz rock roots, wasn't interested. Arguments turned into silence. Meetings grew hostile. And when Cetera requested a break to promote his solo work, after delivering his first solo hit, "Glory of Love," the band gave him an ultimatum: pick Chicago, or pick yourself. Cetera chose the latter. The split made headlines, but Cetera said little. He didn't trash the band. He didn't fight for the spotlight. He simply disappeared into the mountains, into himself, into a life the public would rarely see again. But why would a man who had everything, fame, money, global adoration, turn his back on the very stage that made him? Some say it was pride, others claim it was survival. The truth may be both, because from that moment on, Peter Cetera wasn't just a former lead singer. He became one of the most enigmatic figures in pop music, there, but never truly seen. He still recorded, still released albums, still sang at award shows. But with each passing year, he receded further, declining interviews, turning down Chicago reunion offers, skipping induction ceremonies, avoiding the machine he once helped build. And as his name faded from headlines, a question began to echo louder. What does a man like Peter Cetera do when he finally gets the silence he always wanted? That question would linger for decades, until the world caught a glimpse of the life he built behind the curtain, far from the lights, far from the band, and far from the fame that once defined him. When Peter Cetera left Chicago, he didn't just leave a band. He left a legacy half-formed and a fan base split down the middle. In 1986, his solo single, "Glory of Love," featured on the Karate Kid Part 2 soundtrack, became a global smash, earning an Oscar nomination and topping the Billboard Hot 100. It was proof he didn't need Chicago, not musically, not commercially. But success, it seemed, came at a cost. The public embraced the voice, the industry, less so. Rumors swirled. Cetera was difficult, demanding, a control freak. The same traits that once drove Chicago to its biggest hits were now weaponized against him. Behind the scenes, Cetera was struggling. Fame had become a prison. He hated interviews. He loathed travel. And more than anything, he despised the music politics that followed his every move. After releasing a string of successful solo albums through the late 80s and early 90s, he made a decision that would once again baffle fans and frustrate record executives. He stopped touring. Not entirely, not forever, but often enough that fans began to ask, "Where is Peter Cetera?" He wasn't in LA anymore, not in New York, not at award shows or red carpets. Instead, he'd quietly relocated to the mountains of Idaho, buying a sprawling estate surrounded by trees, wildlife, and almost no one else. Friends say it was more than a retreat. It was an escape. By the early 2000s, Peter Cetera had become a kind of ghost in the music world, a legend by voice, not by presence. And though he occasionally surfaced at private concerts, on television specials, or in one-off collaborations, his full withdrawal from the spotlight was unmistakable. He refused to reunite with Chicago, even as they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016. Though fans begged, though the industry pleaded, though even his former bandmates extended a final olive branch, Cetera declined. "I just don't think it's a good idea," he said in a rare interview. But many insiders believe the wounds never healed. That behind the smile was bitterness. Not just over creative differences, but over betrayal. Because leaving Chicago didn't just cost him a stage, it cost him a brotherhood. And even now, at 80 years old, living in peace and comfort, surrounded by beauty and silence, some say Cetera still carries the weight of what was lost. Peter Cetera may have vanished from the spotlight, but in the quiet spaces where fame no longer reached, he was building something far more intimate: his family. For a man known for writing some of the most emotionally resonant love songs of the 20th century, fatherhood became the one story he never quite put to music. Cetera has 2 daughters, both born during very different chapters of his life, and both central to the quieter identity he shaped after retreating from the stage. His first daughter, Claire, was born in 1983 during his marriage to Diane Ninny, a songwriter and artist in her own right. Claire grew up under the shadow of Cetera's stardom during the height of his success with Chicago and the early days of his solo career. The spotlight, while never directly on her, cast a long and confusing glow. In adulthood, Claire carved her own artistic path, one that mirrors her father's in depth, if not in sound. Her music veers into ambient, indie, and experimental territory, often raw, unstructured, and emotionally rich. Though their musical languages differ, the emotional DNA is unmistakable. She has credited her father's influence in shaping her creative instincts, but she's also alluded to long gaps in their relationship. In scattered interviews and cryptic song lyrics, Claire has spoken of emotional distance, of a father who was physically present at times, but emotionally remote. Some in their orbit say Cetera struggled to balance the demands of fame and fatherhood, particularly in those chaotic years post-Chicago, when his life was a blur of tours, television, and public scrutiny. Others believe he simply didn't know how to be a parent in the traditional sense, that he was always more fluent in melody than in conversation. His second daughter, Senna, arrived in the late 1990s from a later relationship. By then, Cetera's life had slowed. He was living full-time in Idaho, far from the pressures of the music industry. Senna's childhood unfolded not in backstage corridors or hotel suites, but in forests, gardens, and quiet domestic spaces. Friends say the difference was palpable. This time, Cetera was hands-on. He drove her to school, attended her recitals, cooked meals, built routines. Where Claire's early years were shaped by absence and intensity, Senna's were filled with presence and calm. He wanted to do it differently, said one close family friend. He didn't want to miss it this time. Peter Cetera is not a man who shares openly. He rarely speaks in public, and when he does, it's often with a guarded tone. But when the topic turns to his daughters, something shifts. His voice lowers, slows. There's a gravity to it, a softness that slips through the cracks. In one rare interview, he admitted that fatherhood was the only role where he never felt entirely in control. No spotlight, no applause, no do-overs. He's described it as the one performance you can't rehearse, a former colleague said. Yet behind his walls of privacy, those close to him say Cetera is deeply devoted. He rarely talks about legacy, but if he does, it's not about awards or record sales. It's about raising daughters who can stand on their own, who create, feel deeply, and live with purpose. He may not have always known how to express love in words, but in the silence of Idaho, surrounded by pine trees and old guitars, that love finally had room to breathe. For the man who once sang to millions, perhaps the only applause he ever truly needed was theirs. Tucked deep in the mountains of Ketchum, Idaho, sits a home as elusive as the man who owns it. Peter Cetera's estate is not visible from the main road. There are no glossy spreads in Architectural Digest, no social media posts flaunting a grand foyer or luxury kitchen. What's known comes from whispers. Local builders, landscapers, the occasional contractor who signs an NDA and says little more than, "It's beautiful," and it is. According to county records and satellite images, the property sprawls across several acres, flanked by dense pine forests and a winding private drive. A modern rustic lodge-style structure anchors the compound, with large panoramic windows overlooking the hills. There's a recording studio on site, small, intimate, lined with analog gear. Cetera has never stopped writing music. He just doesn't share it. The home isn't just luxurious, it's fortified. Friends say the interior is designed for quiet. Soundproofed walls, blackout curtains, and hidden passageways connecting different parts of the house. There's a reason for this. Cetera's fear of intrusion runs deep. Over the years, obsessed fans and determined journalists have attempted to reach the property. None have succeeded. The estate is layered in privacy measures, motion sensors, cameras, and coded gates. But the security isn't just physical, it's emotional. After decades of being misrepresented, painted as the diva of Chicago, blamed for the band's breakup, accused of being aloof and self-centered, Cetera found comfort in retreat. He turned his home into a sanctuary, and it became the place where he finally lived on his own terms. Inside, the walls are filled with music history, gold and platinum records, photos from decades past, and handwritten lyrics to songs that once ruled the charts. But not all of them are his. He's reportedly a collector of forgotten voices, vintage vinyl, obscure 1960s soul demos, even cassette tapes from regional gospel groups. In one room, shelves are lined with unlabeled reels, recordings he's never released, never played for anyone. Some date back to his early years in Chicago. Others are more recent. A musical diary no one is allowed to read. He rarely entertains, but when he does, it's intimate. Old friends, fellow recluses, musicians who understand the burden of being known. And outside, past the house and the guest quarters, is a garden. It's where Cetera reportedly spends most of his mornings, tending to plants, sitting in silence, listening to the wind move through the trees. It's not what most people imagine when they think of a rock star's life. But that's the point. Peter Cetera didn't want the fame, he wanted the peace. And in the hills of Idaho, he may have finally found it. For most collectors, a car garage is a showroom, a glossy, Instagram-ready museum of horsepower and shine. For Peter Cetera, it's a vault. Hidden behind a set of unmarked barn doors on his estate, lies one of the most discreet collections of vintage and luxury automobiles in the music world. No press tours, no auction previews, just a quiet obsession. Locals say Cetera's garage houses more than a dozen vehicles, each acquired with meticulous care. There's the cherry red 1965 Ford Mustang Fastback he's had since the Chicago days. A black Mercedes-Benz 600 SEL with custom interior, rumored to be the same one he drove across California during his solo tour years. And a forest green Jaguar XJ220 that's rarely, if ever, seen on the roads. But the most prized piece in the collection isn't flashy. It's a 1953 Chevrolet Bel Air convertible, sky blue, white top, untouched. It was the car Cetera and his older brother used to dream about owning when they were kids growing up on the west side of Chicago. He found one in pristine condition at an estate sale in Montana. Bought it on the spot, drove it home himself. For Cetera, these cars aren't trophies, they're time capsules. Each one tells a story. A tour he didn't want to go on, a road trip that cleared his head, a song he wrote while driving through desert rain. The garage is lined with handwritten notes pinned to the wall, quotes, lyrics, memories, some faded, some fresh, none public. The man who once sold out arenas doesn't show off his cars. He doesn't rent them to music videos or showrooms. Most fans don't even know he owns them. Because Peter Cetera doesn't collect for admiration. He collects to remember. But there's a sadness to the collection, too. Neighbors say the garage lights are off and on late into the night. Cetera sometimes sits in the Mustang for hours without turning it on. Just sitting, windows down, radio off, staring into the dark. It's not about speed, it's about stillness. And in that silence, surrounded by metal ghosts and faded dreams, a question lingers. What do you do with a collection meant for no one but yourself? Peter Cetera never remarried. After his divorce from Diane Ninny in 1991, the headlines faded. No scandals, no tabloid chases, just quiet. The man who once sang some of the greatest love songs of the 20th century seemed to step away from love itself. In a rare interview in the early 2000s, he was asked about marriage. His answer was clipped. It didn't work out. I'm not sure I'm built for it. But those close to him say that's only half the story. After the divorce, Cetera dated quietly. A few long-term relationships. A handful of intense but brief romances. But nothing that stuck. Friends describe him as impossible to reach emotionally. Generous, kind, but guarded, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. He could write about heartbreak better than anyone, one former partner said, because he never really let himself heal from it. His songs were often mistaken for autobiography. Ballads like Hard Habit to Break and Next Time I Fall carried so much longing that fans assumed they reflected his personal life. But Cetera has always blurred the line between truth and art. What is known is this: the end of his marriage marked the beginning of his retreat. He didn't tour for years. He turned down interviews. He moved, and he stopped writing about love the way he used to. His later albums are filled with reflection, nostalgia, and loss, but rarely romantic hope. Still, the ache never left his voice. And in the rare photos that surface, of Cetera alone at a coffee shop in Sun Valley, or walking a quiet trail near his home, there's something unmistakable in his eyes. Not loneliness, but something heavier. Regret. Not just for lost love, but for the walls built too high, too fast. For the rooms he never let anyone enter. And for the years he spent learning to be alone, only to wonder if maybe he never really had to be. Because for all the songs he wrote about love, there's one he never finished. The one about what it means to let someone stay. By traditional measures, Peter Cetera is rich. Multiple decades of record sales, writing royalties, solo tours, and licensing have quietly stacked his net worth well into the tens of millions. As of 2025, estimates place his fortune somewhere between $35 to $40 million. But you'd never know it by looking at him. Cetera never bought a mansion in Beverly Hills. He didn't flaunt Rolexes or invest in vanity projects. He doesn't own a clothing line, a fragrance, or a tequila brand. Unlike his contemporaries, he never seemed interested in converting fame into empire. Instead, he disappeared into simplicity. His wealth, like his life, is mostly invisible. But it's there. He still collects songwriting royalties from some of the most enduring ballads of the 20th century. If You Leave Me Now alone has been used in everything from commercials to films to streaming shows. Add in Hard to Say I'm Sorry, You're the Inspiration, Glory of Love, and dozens more, and the passive income becomes staggering. It's the kind of catalog most musicians would kill for, and Cetera rarely even acknowledges. He owns several properties outright. The Idaho estate, a smaller home in Arizona used for winter escapes, and, reportedly, a studio apartment in downtown Nashville that he keeps for inspiration, though he hasn't used it in years. But Cetra's spending is mostly private, even restrained. Friends say his biggest splurges are rare instruments and rare cars, and even those are chosen with meticulous care. One friend described his financial habits as almost monk-like. No extravagance, no impulse buys, just preservation. He's also rumored to be a silent philanthropist. A few whispers have leaked over the years: donations to children's hospitals under pseudonyms, funding for music programs in Chicago area schools, anonymous gifts to shelters and hospice centers in Idaho. He never confirms it. He never takes the credit. Because money, for Cetera, isn't currency. It's insulation. He uses it to keep the world out, to build walls between the life he had and the life he chose. Not because he's hiding something, but because he doesn't owe anyone an explanation anymore. For decades, fans and media asked, "Where is Peter Cetera?" The truth is simple. He's exactly where he wants to be. We just can't afford the silence he paid for. If you listen closely to Peter Cetera's solo work, you'll notice a recurring undercurrent: faith. Not religion in the traditional sense. He's never been a church-going celebrity, never endorsed a doctrine or spiritual brand. But the themes are there: redemption, reflection, the ache for something eternal. In interviews, he's cryptic about belief. "I believe in something," he once said. "I'm just not sure it's what everyone else believes in." Those close to him describe a deeply spiritual man, quiet, contemplative, sometimes obsessive about the unseen forces of life. He meditates, reads Eastern philosophy, keeps shelves filled with worn-out books by Rumi, Thomas Merton, and Lao Tzu. There's a chapel on his property, not a traditional one, but a room built like a sanctuary, filled with candles, floor cushions, and a single stained glass window depicting a dove in flight. That search for peace, for something higher, may be what pulled him away from fame in the first place. One former bandmate said it best: Peter was never comfortable with the noise. He wanted to hear something quieter, something more real. But isolation has its price. Cetera lives alone. His daughters visit. A caretaker stops by. Friends call occasionally. But days go by without conversation. Sometimes weeks. When the pandemic hit in 2020, many artists crumbled under the weight of loneliness. Cetera didn't. One friend joked, he'd been preparing for it for 20 years. But even in solitude, questions remain. Does he miss the crowd, the applause, the shared heartbeat of an audience singing his lyrics back to him? Maybe, maybe not. Because when asked, once, during a brief moment of candor, if he missed the stage, Cetera paused for several seconds before answering. "I miss the connection," he said, "but not the performance." And that distinction may be everything. He's not chasing relevance. He's chasing stillness. Not fame, faith, not legacy, peace. Peter Cetera may have vanished from the public eye, but in the music industry, his name still sparks debate. To some, he's a legend, the voice of a generation, the man who helped shape adult contemporary music and bring emotional vulnerability into the mainstream. Elton John once called him the soul in Chicago's machine. Quincy Jones reportedly tried to sign him in the 90s. To others, he's a cautionary tale. The brilliant frontman who walked away. The band member who fractured a family. The voice that should have headlined stadiums for decades, but instead retreated into the woods. When Chicago was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016, the moment was supposed to be a full-circle celebration. But Cetera declined to attend. The band was there. They thanked him, but the wound was visible. Cetera later said the reunion just didn't feel right. The industry took note. To this day, Chicago continues to tour, without him. New singers, new arrangements, but the absence is unmistakable. Fans still chant for "If You Leave Me Now," still ask if he'll ever come back. He won't. And those who know him best say that choice, however unpopular, was the most honest thing he ever did. Because Cetera's not interested in rewriting the past. He's protecting it. His legacy isn't in awards or reunions. It's in the millions of voices who sang along to his words, in the tears shed during wedding dances, in the quiet power of a love song sung alone in a parked car. The industry may not understand his choices, but history? History remembers the voice. Peter Cetera turned 80 in September 2024. There was no televised tribute, no Grammy-sponsored birthday gala, no viral medley of celebrity cameos singing his songs. Just a ripple, a soft hum in the current of music history. A few quiet mentions from fans on social media, a couple of nostalgic radio segments, and then silence. But maybe that's exactly how he wanted it. For decades, Peter Cetera had opportunities to return, lucrative ones. Fans wrote letters. Promoters offered millions. Documentaries were pitched. Chicago, the band that made him a household name, left a microphone open at nearly every major reunion. And every time, he said no. Politely, firmly, finally. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was done. Because for Cetera, the final chord wasn't something to perform. It wasn't a last hurrah, a dramatic comeback, or a bow beneath the spotlight. It was something sacred, something to protect. In a world obsessed with closure, Cetera chose silence, and that silence became his legacy. Today, while many of his peers still tour the globe, chasing a flicker of the old light, Cetera lives a life most rock stars can't even imagine. One of intentional obscurity. No entourage, no handlers, no press junkets, no brand deals, no Instagram, just the mountains of Idaho, a collection of old vinyl, handwritten lyrics tucked in drawers, morning walks through the forest, evenings spent in his personal chapel. A home filled not with awards, but with echoes. And yet, the music remains. It hasn't faded. It's only shifted places. His voice, once blasting through stadium speakers and broadcast across national television, now lives in quieter corners, played at weddings and funerals, whispered through headphones on lonely nights, echoed across first dances and final goodbyes. Songs like "If You Leave Me Now," "Hard to Say I'm Sorry," "Glory of Love." They're more than hits. They're emotional landmarks, moments people return to when words fail and memory takes over. That may be the great irony of his life. In walking away from the spotlight, Cetera drew closer to the heart than those who stayed in it. He became more human by vanishing, more meaningful by saying less, and for a generation raised on the sound of his voice, that silence carries weight. It invites reflection. It forces us to ask, what is legacy really made of? Is it in the fame sustained or the truth preserved? Because when Cetera is gone, when the studio lights are dark, the reel-to-reel stops spinning, and the garden outside his home grows wild, the story of his life won't be one of absence. It won't be about what he didn't do or who he didn't become. It will be about the echo, the lasting vibration of a note so pure, so deeply felt, that it needed no stage to endure. He gave us songs that bled sincerity. He offered vulnerability at a time when rock demanded bravado. And then, when the applause swelled, he let it fade, on his own terms. Peter Cetera didn't need a microphone to be heard. He didn't need a comeback to be remembered. He only needed one note to last forever. So now we ask, in a world still obsessed with fame and noise, will we learn from the quiet path Peter Cetera chose, or chase the applause until it's too late? His life is a mirror. What we see in it is up to us. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.